Thanks so much, Terry. At this time, if anybody has any questions that they wrote down, or is there any written question at first? Okay, does anybody have any questions that you would like to raise your hand or stand up? Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, Terry, there are some of your former colleagues who, to this day, argue that there are terrorists coming across the border.
I've never seen any evidence. Have you? Not that you would watch.
The question was, a lot of individuals still...
I did finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But yeah, it's just, I'm not aware of any evidence that there is. But shouldn't these people know better? And why aren't there more people calling bullshit?
The question was, a lot of individuals are still saying, excuse me, a lot of individuals are still saying that there's a lot of terrorists coming across the border, and there's not a lot of other people correcting that information. So that was the question.
Well, look, I try not to indulge in sour grapes more than a few hours a day. But I think it's a little like the argument about beheadings. When Jan Brewer said that there were beheadings in the desert, she had no basis for it. And there were none. They couldn't find a single reported incident. But I think people who are scared, and many are apprehensive about what they think is they hear about atrocities, the shootings in Mexico. They think that perhaps they know that there were beheadings there. And so it seemed all too logical to say, well, they might come across. Therefore, it's like voter fraud. We have to be protected against it even if it's not happening. And I also think that terrorism has become such a sort of a bugaboo, and it seems to be so pervasive that folks come to the conclusion that, well, even if we don't have a verifiable threat, we ought to be protected. The problem I have is maybe that should be one of the metrics. Maybe the number of folks from suspicious countries around the world that could arguably have been here for terrorist purposes should be charted. I know the federal government keeps records of anybody that hits the border that's from any of those destination countries, or excuse me, source countries. We never see those records. But if we're going to have a metric of security for the border, maybe that should be one of the items that they have to disclose. I don't know, but I certainly, in my experience as Attorney General, the repeated theme was, no, not one has been known across the southwest border.
So, as a former law enforcement official, if you had, if you could kind of wave your hand and come up with some solution that would make this nonsense stop. How could, what my organization tried to do is, we've gone great lengths to try and educate the public into what the reality is. And it seemed to have worked pretty well. But there are still some of these things that just persist over time. And, this thing that, and it's all water-based. I mean, it's not, there's no reality in it. What else can we be doing to stop this kind of rhetoric?
Can you respond to that? Yeah, great. No, is this working?
Yeah, the mics are actually not working, so I encourage you, if you can, to come over here or speak louder.
I can speak up. I've been a number of ICE briefings and then INS briefings beginning in the mid-90s. And the last briefing I was at was the current head of ICE, because I think Hernandez is the first name. They told all of us at this briefing that the most likely terrorist suspect is going to be a middle-class undergraduate student from a Western European university who's going to fly in on a regular tourist visa, an exchange student visa, and is going to be very well educated from a very good family, who's just going to return. And he or she is going to fly into this country and be connected with whoever would provide the smartphone. That was directly from at an ICE briefing. Now, historically, if you look what's going on, in the late 19th century, we were made to be afraid of the indigenous populations who did not want to succumb to Mexican and U.S. encroachment as the border was solidified at the expense of the first peoples in that area. Populations in the Southwest were made afraid of those peoples. Then the Palmer raids came up in the 1920s. Then we were afraid of anarchists to justify federal spending for certain parts of our federal government. Then we were afraid of communists. And now we're afraid of terrorists. So there's a consistency in the dialogue that's being exploited by this anti-immigrant group that's consistently demonstrated since the late 19th century.
I think that the conversation about the impact of the militarization of the border on indigenous communities is, it's really left out of the immigration debate unless, an individual are doing the individual lobbying. And this is a reality. I think that's why it's so important to have folks who are living along the border to be meeting with the congressional representatives who have the power in January states and who are planning on introducing something moving forward. Sharing those stories of the U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents who are being harassed and detained routinely.
Well, how about a former county attorney, judge, and governor of Arizona who gets detained on the border and held in the sun at age 90 for an hour or more?
Well, if we can now kill an American who's an enemy combatant, and the Justice Department 2 weeks ago implied that can happen within the United States. In the next week, they're going to start allowing the National Federation for the who's in charge of aviation, historian, sorry, is going to allow commercial and local drones to run. Going to be tested here in southern Arizona. So local police are going to start using drones. But we're already behind the narcos. But now,
Sure we are.
Yeah. And so, though I would agree with you that we're farther along than you so politely described.
Do you have a question over here?
Terry, those card credit discussing the fraud that that would involve the bank on both sides of the border. Is there evidence that the banks have lobbied for these exemptions?
Not just evidence. I mean, it's out in front, Mike. It's the, for example, it's one of the biggest growth. It started 10 years ago. Stored value cards have added several $100 million in transactions. They picked up another one way to pay everything from welfare payments to judgments. I mean, Kia and Hyundai are now delivering the overcharge, the amount that people are owed because they misstated their mileage. Huge business, $1 trillion, is my understanding, is actually moved these particular storage issues.
Any
Bank showed up.
percentage of drug money that's being transferred that way?
No, I mean, what we're looking at is any way that somebody can move money essentially anonymously. It's what the money laundering is all about, is to make it happen quickly without being traced. And as long as you can put money into an ATM and pull out a card, take it across the border legally, and then take the money out on the other side, you've laundered that money. And that's exactly what the cartels, we have no idea how much. I want to make it really clear. It's probably not the largest source of laundered funds. There's wire transfers are bigger. Actually packing it across the border in cash is significantly bigger. And the Homeland is finally beginning to stop some of that. And just one little detail, if I could add to the laundering desk. We encourage the country of Mexico to clamp down on dollars deposited in Mexico banks. I think $7,000 a month was the maximum you could put outside of pesos. And what happened was, next thing you know, about 2010, they passed the law, and money started moving. $30 to $35 million, it was estimated, was in the economy of Mexico, now illegally, had to go somewhere. So what they did was they hired people to literally put it in backpacks and walk it across the border from south to north. Now, all you have to do is declare it. I've got $100,000 in my backpack. Okay, Customs says, they fill it out. They walked into a bank, deposited it in that bank. It's now clean. It's now washed. They didn't ask who these people were or where they got the money, as they're supposed to. And now it gets wired back to Mexico legitimately. So we forced Mexico to take an action. They did it. And And then we didn't take the reciprocal action to stop the laundered funds and seize them at the border. And I don't get it. What's wrong with this picture? And the stored value cards, the banks fought against making them a different color. They look exactly like your debit card or your credit card. And one of the proposals, one of the simplest proposals, Gabby Giffords put it forward when she was in Congress, was to simply put a stripe across or say something that was stored value. Make it red instead of whatever the other color was. That got stopped. That couldn't be enacted. It would at least tell people that it's a different kind of code. But the biggest thing is you don't have to declare it. It's not considered a money. I met with Washington staffers, you know, the money laundering insider. They know exactly what's happening. They have all the information necessary. And yet there is, Gabby Giffords introduced a bill of 50% value charge. It didn't go anywhere. Unfortunately, she was shocked. And right now there's a Grassley Feinstein bill that's been sent on the same subject. Pretty good bill. As far as I know, it's never gotten a committee to it. And so here's one area where they can take action that would have a border security effect. And there's just no urgency about that. They'll put billions of dollars into getting border patrol or additional numbers. And I hope I made it clear that you could double that number. And I don't think you materially increase the security of the border because of the sophistication of the very well-paid opponent that we're dealing with. I think there's a tendency in the Senate and elsewhere to underestimate how good the cartels are. Unlimited funds, they can buy all the military technology that we have. They have night vision scopes, so they come through with automation at night without showing any light. They're almost invisible to any kind of security. You can buy that. You can buy the communications, the security, the highly qualified survivalists that they use to keep an eye on the border and then communicate back exactly what they're doing. And I hope that describes a very sophisticated criminal operation that is going to find their opportunities and they're going to exploit them. And the only way I know of, from law enforcement, to significantly change that picture is to strangle them. That's what we're going to do.
I actually have a copy of the article that you cited on the HSBC Bank. Let me read to you what the United States government knows. The Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation released a report charging HSBC with laundering Mexican drug money on a massive scale. The report said that the HSBC Mexico Bank had a branch in the Cayman Islands that had no offices or staff, but held 50,000 client accounts and $2.1 billion as of 2008. U.S. authorities had decided, despite ample evidence that HSBC had laundered billions of dollars for major drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia, not to press criminal charges against the bank or any of its executives because the bank was too big to indict. That's a Senate committee report. So, yes, Senators Flake and McCain know.
I just want to say that one of the most impressive documentations that we've seen is this, where you pull that report.
It's my copy. It's a hard copy.
You didn't even Google it. But get the Manchester Guardian article about Wachovia, which is just a year older. And it's exactly the same story.
And that's not what they're issuing press releases on. I mean, they're issuing press releases on meth and, marijuana seizures, not on.
But the Senate subcommittee report is online. I think I have it actually. One of my bibliographies on it.
Well, then ask yourself this question. If the Senate knew enough to issue that report, why did no indictments come out of the Justice Department?
I would argue that it's not, that we might have to worry about the unethical practices more than the corruption. For example, SBI Net, which was referred to about the failed virtual wall. They were $4.7 billion went to that failed virtual wall. It's 4.7 or 7.7. $0.2 billion even after head of Homeland Security Napolitano closed it in 2000, ended the program in 2010, is still unaccounted for, $22 billion. But I would argue,
2.5% of the project completed, so they
Right.
spent millions and only 2.5% of the project.
and that was Boeing. So there's the big corruption. Not corruption, but maybe unethical use of our tax money. But I give you an example in Texas. In West Texas, there are a lot of dry counties. And those dry counties are always going to be dry. And the biggest funders of those dry counties are the counties who own, the liquor store owners in the counties that sell that liquor. In Ector County in West Texas, for example, where I used to live. The Pinky's Liquor Store were the biggest funders of the candidates who won elections year after year in the dry county. And I'll give you another example in Texas. Gregorio Cortez, the story of Gregorio Cortez and the Texas Rangers finally capturing him. If not for Gregorio Cortez, the Texas Rangers might have ceased to exist. The fear from Gregorio Cortez and this uncontrolled Mexican outlaw, who wasn't a Mexican outlaw, Chicano, as we call him Tejano today, he saved the Texas Rangers just a tremendous amount of press coverage. And all we need to fund the Texas Rangers in order to protect us from this unsecure border.
When the president or Lieutenant Napolitano said they moved the goalposts, that's a good analysis, because they keep changing the definition. I was at a conference recently where a scholar got up and very systematically said, here's what you asked for in 2009, and it's there. Here's what you asked for in 2010, a higher number. And it's there. Here's what you asked for today. And so the number keeps moving. People like Jan Brewer will never see a secure border. They don't, and they never stop to say, what is it? You could say, and I'm trying to play this debate. The bottom line was, after that definition, and then I tried to play it the other way and say, well, okay, is a secure border one where nothing moves? No commerce. Sort of like closing the airports. Clearly, some illegal activity comes through with legitimate commerce. So you stop legitimate commerce? Oh, no, you can't do that. All right, now we're zeroing in on it. Let's try to figure out what exactly you can allow, what you're not going to allow. Hopefully, eventually you'll come up with some metrics that will say something short of absolute sealing it.
And you're right, I mean, part of what for me is now no longer using that phrase to describe, they stopped using it. But in 2006, there was a federal law called Secure Fence Act. Quote, operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. But the Government Accountability Office itself has said that it is unrealistic to assume that we're going to have 100% operational control of the border. Customs and Border Protection itself, so that's the first point.
But in itself, how do you determine 100%?
Exactly.
Because the criminals aren't going to tell you, hey, I just got to cross. Right, no, that's one.
And this is a GAO in testimony before Congress noted, quote, resources that would be needed to absolutely prevent every single incursion would be something probably out of reasonable consideration. And so, it's not realistic, which is why now Border Patrol doesn't even, the 2012 Border Patrol Strategic Plan does not even mention operational control. Instead, it focuses on goals that would, quote, mitigate risk rather than increase resources to secure the border. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying, the Tucson Sector Chief is saying, we don't need additional boots on the ground. What they are asking for, what CBP is asking for, is additional, more drones, more privacy, more surveillance, huge moneymaker for all the big corporations. That's what they're asking for. And Flake and senators are focusing on, as an exchange in terms of negotiation, Operation Streamline. And so that's what it boils down to, is that they're saying, even though we can only process 70 immigrants who are entering unlawfully, we're charging them with unlawful felony entries, the courthouse is only able to process 70 immigrants a day. So we could dramatically increase the budget for Operation Streamline, and that's the capacity we have. Or we can build additional courthouses. So I think, again, it is a definition that I think keeps on.
Well, not only can we not afford it, but let me quote somebody that I almost never quote in any kind of positive way, and that's Senator Bush. We had a session in his last year in office. The Attorney General's met with him, and he said something I would never forget, which basically was, A, one of the best descriptions of why we have to have immigration reform for the good of this country that I've ever heard. It was brilliant, it was straightforward, it was epigrammatic. Somebody asked him afterward if it would ever be passed. He said, oh no, of course not. But the thing he said that I think we should all remember is Mexico is our best friend in the world. They are our best trading partner and our best strategic ally in terms of international trade. Since you don't station troops on the border of your best friend. And I wish other people in his party had heard that lesson because it was very wise and I think it's absolutely accurate. And it goes to the symbolic aspect of this hyper-militarization of the border.
By the way, it would be wrong to, this discussion, this debate, it would be wrong to create a Republican and a Democratic side. Like that comment by President George W. Bush. You have to remember, Republicans have made the most progress for the immigration issue in this country, starting with Ronald Reagan. And the current administration is supporting Kennedy Core Banking Fastening, which, by the way, the Mesa Gateway Airport, where they issue Polytechnic, is at where I teach, is the central point for the Rocky Mountain area. In fact, on Mondays and Wednesdays, you can see the bus. I'm driving into work, there goes the bus. A dilapidated Greyhound bus goes to the back of the airport and drops off, forces people off the bus. But my point was that securing the border gives hardliners something they can take back to the constituents. It's a political issue. It has to be compromised. The moral thing to do, first and foremost, is to give the dreamers what they earn, what they deserve, is citizenship. There's no doubt about it. But what are we going to do to the immigration hawks, the border hawks? We have to give them something. So securing the border gives, they can tell their constituents, we had to do this comprehensive immigration reform, we secured the border, they're going to make up some number, more money spent on, for Boeing, for, with the Cheney Corporation, whatever that was, Halliburton. We have to give them something. It has to be a compromise. Securing the border is going to lead to some type of out for those hawks that they need to give back to the constituents. Because they're not all in mind, let's be honest.
Thank you so much. Now, those are remarks. For a long time, our immigrant communities have been really criminalized, as Alexander had mentioned them. For a long time, individuals like myself that have been here undocumented and currently documented have been perceived as criminals in our communities. It took a lot of work, and it's still a lot of work to change that perception, and we continue to do it every day. When it comes to border security, the perception is still there that drug smugglers are immigrants, that immigrants come, are immigrants, for terrorists come, for terrorist reasons, or for drug-related reasons. There's a lot of work to do to separate those two issues. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We've talked about a very complicated issue academically, even for experts, but I want to really bring it back down to reality and what it means for people. I entered this country when I was 7 years old. My mom and I came to this country from Monterrey, Mexico, and she was running away from domestic violence. We started coming here on a Saturday morning, and I remember a very long hike. When you're 7 years old, that's all you remember. A few weeks ago, two of our member organizations, No More Deaths and Border Action Network, gave a presentation about what's happening at the border, the people that are dying, the people that have no shoes, that don't have any water. And they showed a video of some of the water bottles that their volunteers had put there for people not to die while crossing the border. We're being kicked out by Border Patrol. In terms of humanity, that's what it means. Yes, we need border security, however you want to define it, but it needs to be balanced with human rights. We need a life-saving border policy, not a life-killing border policy. Now, I'm going to quote somebody that I never quoted, also a Bush. Last week, Jeb Bush was in town for one of his book tours, and he said, we're not going to reach border security until we first have a functional immigration system. I've heard that before, and I'm glad that more people are saying that on both sides of the aisle. And that's the message that we need to take to our senators, to our congressional representatives, that we need both things, and we need to define what that is. I want to thank the panelists for being here today, and I want to thank you for being here as well. The Somos America Coalition, and me personally, strongly believe that immigration reform, and as advocates, our duty and our responsibility is not just to advocate for something, it should really educate the community what that is. point in terms of, and that's the point I was making. We can't just blindly advocate for something without knowing what it is. And the point of panels like this is so people educate themselves as to what the issues are, what they're advocating for, and what that's going to look like. I don't have anything else to add to that because that's perfect. So thank you so much for that, and thank you all for being here today. We do have to respect the time that we have in this facility, so thank you so much for the panel here.